Entrepreneurially Thinking is a presentation of BioSTL and CET, Center for Emerging Technologies, with Rare Gem Productions, changing the way you view new ventures, including you on the pathway to success with your business in the St. Louis marketplace and beyond. Here's your hosts, Cheryl and Christy. Now let's get thinking entrepreneurially.
Welcome back to the Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. Our goal is to raise your entrepreneurial mindset and create pathways for business success in the St. Louis marketplace and beyond. I'm Christy Maxfield.
And I'm Dr. Cheryl Watkins-Moore. I lead our inclusion initiative for BioSTL for the region. Hey, Miss Christy girl, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing well. We are rocking and rolling, girl.
We are. And you always make sure folks understand your role in the ecosystem. What's really important to us, too, is that BioSTL and CET are our founding presenting sponsors, and they've just signed on for another year's worth of shows. Yes, we're very excited, which means that as we're recording this at the end of 2018, they have committed to helping us do another 4 seasons in 2019, and we will be planning our guests. So as you guys think about who you'd like to hear from, what stories you'd like us to tell.
Send it to us.
Maybe we want to go outside the St. Louis region.
We'd love to.
Talk to some entrepreneurs who are also doing great work in other communities. That could be in Missouri. That could be around Missouri. That could be, not even adjacent to.
That could be in
We touch like 11 states or something. It's crazy. We could pretty much stay in Missouri and still talk to people from all over the world.
Technology is great.
Exactly. So we want to just remind you to check out their websites and thank them for supporting us so that we can continue to come to you, and also to share us with your friends. Remind them that they can find us on their favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes, Spreaker, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc.
So today, interestingly, as we
are actually talking with an entrepreneur who's outside the region.
I was going to say that.
I'm sorry. I just, my part of the brain took over for a minute and I just talked right over you.
I was going to say that. But as I always start off with a little bit of trivia tidbit, Michael Porter, an American academic known for his theories on economics, business strategy, and social causes, challenges us to turn to businesses to address the social problems that we face. Our guest today, who is not in Missouri.
We'll talk about her location later.
Yes. Not only views business as a solution providing agency that consciously works for people, but as a medium that empowers and does not work exploitively against them. She builds bakeries, yummy, as a means to create social empowerment, financial independence, and access to opportunity for women globally. Yes. So when we come back, we'll be speaking with Markey Culver, a returned Peace Corps volunteer, Rwanda 2012, and recent MBA grad of WashU, right here in Missouri, Olin's Business School, who has innovatively fused her educational background and communication with her unwavering commitment to bring access to opportunity for all. So, as we say, stay listening.
CET, the Center for Emerging Technologies, is a proud founding sponsor of this Entrepreneurially Thinking podcast. We want you to know all about the great things they are up to. CET is in the business of entrepreneur development, offering a variety of programming to meet the training and technical needs of early-stage entrepreneurs. These programs include the Square One Ignite and Bootcamp training program, Level Next, technical assistance, workshops, and other educational programming. To learn more about CET, the Center for Emerging Technologies, visit CETSTL.com. And for your renewed and continuing support, CET, we say thank you.
My name is Markey Culver. I'm the founder of the Women's Bakery. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and entrepreneurial thinking to me means seeing opportunity where others see risk.
Joining us today is Markey Culver, founder and co-director of the Women's Bakery. She sees bread and the nutrition it provides not only as a way of nurturing and healing the folks who actually eat the bread, but of building and rebuilding communities through social enterprise. And this is really based on a simple mantra of we can, therefore we must. So,
Oh,
Markey, we're just so glad to have you here with
Yes.
us today. Thank you for making time.
Oh, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
And I alluded before, we met a number of years ago, just before you were starting your MBA program at WashU.
Yes.
And as Cheryl said, right now you're not in the fine state of Missouri in the wonderful city of St. Louis. Where are you at?
I'm actually in Denver, Colorado. I moved. This is always comical. I moved in March. I usually say I just moved, but I recognize that it's November. But the reason I say I just moved is because I've actually only been in Denver for a cumulative, not consecutive 9 weeks.
Oh my
since
goodness.
March. Yeah. So I travel a lot. So whether
Wow.
it's St. Louis or Denver, it really doesn't matter because I have a bed in Denver, basically.
Okay.
and that's what I have.
Was Denver home or St. Louis home before you
No,
started?
St. Louis is my home. Yeah, I was born and raised in St. Louis. And the impetus for the move to Denver was because I have a team member out in Denver who had been starting the office and our footprint in Denver 3 years ago when I was starting my program at WashU. And so the intention was to eventually come out to Denver because I wanted to, but never lose the ties to St. Louis. So I think if you even look at our website, we still say that we have offices in St. Louis and Denver because St. Louis is still home.
So that is really interesting. I mean, why Denver? Why did you choose Denver?
Yeah, well, primarily for personal reasons. I can
Okay.
try and fabricate business reasons, but
Hey, personal counts.
Is it the skiing? Is it the mountains? Is it the
Yeah, I
fresh
think
air?
it's
It's
the
all
mountains.
of that. Yeah.
I'm excited to try. So again, St. Louis will always be home. And I think that I'm excited by that because I know I can always go back. And I'm very grateful to St. Louis. And honestly, I still have a foot in St. Louis. I'm there. It feels like every month.
Okay.
Yeah, I really am still in St. Louis, but this was more for personal and to see what Denver is like and to be closer to the mountains because I do love being outdoors.
Awesome.
So Christy alluded to, I love always the background story. You started here in St. Louis. What were you doing? I mean, you went to school here. Did you work here? I mean,
Yeah. So is this how the women's bakery or
just you.
just me?
Just starting.
Way
I mean,
back.
tell us.
Way back.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I was born and raised in St. Louis. I did go to school up until high school. I went away for high school. So I went to boarding school and then went away for college. And then after college, I worked for 2 years. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. So I worked in Texas as a legislative aide. And then I then worked for a pipeline lobbyist and thought, I could keep doing this or I could join the Peace Corps.
And that seems logical to me.
I was going to say that seems
Right.
very logical. Yeah.
And yeah, and honestly, it was because I realized that there was great power in persuasion and also in ability. And I have always considered myself fortunate, especially to like being from St. Louis and the family that I come from. Like I have been given the gift of education and how am I going to use it? And so when I was working, I loved being in Austin and I enjoyed my work, but I thought, I think I could do a lot more with my education and with the skill sets that I have. So I joined the Peace Corps. And the rest is history.
Wow.
I just chose to come back to St. Louis for grad school.
And when you got back here, you had already founded the Women's Bakery, correct?
Yeah, so the Women's Bakery has had, I call it the Phoenix. There have been many risings. So
And is that a bread pun?
Oh
as
my
well?
God, that's
Right.
a pun. Unbelievable pun. Yes.
That's true. That's so true. Pun intended.
Okay.
So, so the Women's Bakery, the genesis for the Women's Bakery was during my Peace Corps service. So then I started the predecessor to the Women's Bakery. After leaving the Peace Corps and coming back to St. Louis for a few months, I then went back to Rwanda to build the first of the Women's Bakery, which was then called the Rwanda Women's Bakery. And then I came back to the United States, and the Rwanda Women's Bakery model had worked in some ways and failed in a lot of other ways. So when I came back to the United States and to St. Louis, I was hooked, basically. I really believed in our vision, and I really believed that this model could work.
So let me ask you this. When you went to the Peace Corps, you went to Rwanda first?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is funny because actually when I applied to the Peace Corps, during my interview, they asked if there's anywhere I didn't want to go. And I was like, yeah, Rwanda. And so they were like,
speak it and it shall be so, or not.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I just always laugh because truly I requested Latin America and agriculture and they're like, cool, you're going to sub-Saharan Africa and teaching English. So
oh, wow. This was what?
That was in 2010.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that was after all of I don't know if it was still going on or not.
No, the genocide. Is that what you're referring to? Yep. So the genocide that we know about is really a culmination of genocides in Rwanda. So that was in 1994. Okay. And Rwanda, since then, it has positively transformed. And now it's just like a verdant and lush country, and actually has had one of the fastest growing economies on the African continent for the last 7 years.
Wow.
So statistically, Rwanda is one of the safest African countries right now, and still was in 2010 when I was assigned there. So truly my request not to go to Rwanda was pure ignorance. It was not rooted in any fact whatsoever.
But so then the Women's Bakery came up while you were there, the business model when you were there the first time. Why go to that model?
It happened by accident. And this is why I'm always so thrilled, like honored and often surprised that I get labeled with the term entrepreneur, because truly it happened by accident. And I just kind of fell into it. But
sometimes that's how a lot of entrepreneurs, their businesses happen. They fall into it.
Well, you fell because you saw a need, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I did. And I think that there were a lot of things that kind of came into place or came into focus. And I think I was in the right time at the right place. But so I was in Rwanda. I was in a rural village. My primary assignment in the Peace Corps was as an English teacher. But my secondary assignment was as a health worker. So I worked at a rural health center. And I worked primarily in the nutrition and maternity ward. So I was already working with women and children. And I was doing cooking demonstrations, teaching women how to cook with vegetables. And the reason I was doing that was because vegetables in rural parts of the country still had a stigma, and that only the poorest of the poor and women and children eat vegetables. So it was in an effort to try,
What do the wealthy people eat?
French fries and
oh my God.
So
we cannot judge, my friend. We
I
cannot
know.
judge.
I'm like, are they trying to kill off the wealthy?
I know. So it's just, and you can imagine too, like we do have quite a lot of hurdles. I mean, and I'll go back to the story, but just fast forward, like we make nutritious breads. And so we're constantly battling oil and sugar because when you're wealthy, you can afford oil and sugar. And so trying to expose some of the myths that being fat means you're healthy, because not always, right? And I worked already with women and children. I was passionate. I'm always passionate about food. I love thinking about it, talking about it, eating it, making it, everything. So it was a treat for me to be able to work with women anyway. But one of the things that I realized was that we did have an abundance of food around us because we were on a road, a dirt road, but it was more of a thoroughfare from one bigger town to another. And people were constantly bringing produce back and forth because most rural Rwandans are agrarian, which means that they're farmers. And so they're selling their produce. So I was watching cabbages go by and everyone's selling onions and tomatoes, and avocados are truly like falling off trees.
Wow.
So I thought, okay, well, let's just make salad for lunch because most people only ate a meal a day, which is very typical. And in order for food to be considered food, it had to be cooked. So I thought, well, I'm just going to make salad.
Yeah. Oh, that is really interesting. So that's a cultural thing then. Yeah. Especially so I'm thinking of with all the availability of fruits and vegetables and things like, nobody thought that putting a salad together, that's a cultural difference from here to someplace else.
Yeah, I think it could be, or I think it maybe is just exposure. Because I think if you're in a town in Rwanda, a city certainly, salads are far more common.
Okay.
It was just in a rural place. Yeah, food had to be cooked in order for it to be considered food. So I decided to go against the grain and started making salad and taught a group of women how to do the same. And it was just a really wonderful platform for me to be with the women and teach them about nutrition and provide another meal basically during the day. So then one day I decided, you know what? I really want bread because I can't find it in the village.
And bread goes really well with a salad.
It sure does. You just slather some mayonnaise on it and some olive oil.
Right.
Some of that avocado falling off the tree.
Ooh, yeah.
Exactly. Yes. So I looked up a recipe. The Peace Corps had provided us with a cookbook, and I found a very simple recipe for yeast bread, and I could find all the ingredients nearby. And the Peace Corps during our training had taught us how to construct a Dutch oven over an open fire. So I did. I just made bread.
Wow.
That's what I said when it actually worked. Because I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I did this.
Oh my God. I think of myself sometimes, if you're stranded on a desert island and you have to put stuff together, I'm like, I will starve to death and die.
Well, I don't see you making a Dutch oven is all I'm saying. Manual or no manual. Anyway.
I don't know. I'm convinced that humans are adaptable, so I have faith in you.
Oh, my friend.
I'm betting against you. Markey's putting money on you. I think I'm betting against you, my friend.
Yeah.
All the love in my heart, but I'm not seeing that happen.
Oh, my gosh.
So if you had to bake bread, then bread is not necessarily a staple of the rural community's food either then.
It's really not. And it might have been. I don't know. And people often ask this question like, well, don't most cultures have bread, and why don't they have bread, or why isn't bread readily available? And the question that has always kind of stumped me is everybody knows what bread is in Rwanda. It's just hard to get it. And so like, how do people know what bread is if you really don't have access or exposure to it? Right. So I don't have a good answer. I have an educated guess, which is, yes, I do think there was probably a typical and cultural bread in Rwanda, but perhaps the institutional knowledge was lost in the genocide or the series of genocides. I really just don't know. But yeah, bread is very hard to come by, but it's a well-known and universal commodity. And something I've always found interesting, actually, is that Rwandans do have tea often. And there's not necessarily a designated tea time, but tea is a very typical drink to have. You sit down in a cafe or you take tea, and it's very typical to have bread with your tea, but there's no bread. And I'm like, how?
But Rwanda was a British colony. So yeah,
it was a Belgian colony.
Was it Belgium? I thought it was British. Yeah. Oh, wow.
No, but it's a good guess because a lot of the neighboring countries around Rwanda were British. And actually, the reason this is also a very good educated guess is because Rwanda switched their medium of instruction in school from Francophone to Anglophone in 2009 to have their population come into like the economies and the commerce that is the former British colonies. So Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. So I think that's a really good guess otherwise.
Wow. You have educated our listeners and us. This is wonderful. But you actually found a need with the whole bread idea. Just like with most entrepreneurs, you discovered a need and you move forward with that with a business.
Well, and this wasn't just about having bread for tea time. If I recall from years ago now, this was about a highly nutritious product that could actually address malnutrition within the community. Is that correct?
Yes. And again, that was the accidental part. So I made bread and the women came in for their salad making lessons, saw the bread, were like, what? Where did you buy that?
What is that rising over there?
Exactly. And so they asked to learn. And so I started, the salad lessons were quickly replaced by bread making lessons. But then it was the women who inspired me because I saw what they did with the bread that they made, and they fed their children. It was like immediate. And I thought, oh my goodness, if we just pump this bread full of nutrients, it could be a really good way to have a healthful snack for kids. And so that was the idea behind the nutritious bread. But then the women gave me the second aha moment, which became the business. So again, another accident, because truly my goal with teaching women how to make this bread was and especially with nutritious bread, because then we started experimenting with different recipes to make the bread nutritious, like fortifying it with peanut flour, putting in micronutrients, which are like vegetables.
Yep.
And that was my goal, was just to give them something that they could make and feed their kids like a snack. But
I was going to say, and bread will hold you for a while. So those, yes.
Especially like and again, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but like a healthy fat bread, right? Like a peanut flour bread. So yeah. And if you've got kiddos who are going all day without anything, then yes, it does. It's certainly better than nothing. So that was my goal. But then the women started selling their bread. And then some other women also had the idea to sell their bread. So this idea happened with all of the women kind of simultaneously, where they discovered that there was a market.
Wow.
And there was demand for something for which there was no supply. So we could create that supply.
So that's interesting. So when we come back, let's talk more about this business model that got born out of both you and the women from Rwanda. That'd be great.
BioSTL is a proud founding sponsor of this entrepreneurially thinking podcast, and we want you to know all about the great things they are up to. BioSTL Fundamentals is an entrepreneur development program designed to support early would-be entrepreneurs in the life sciences in St. Louis. The program provides a one-on-one customized business learning experience for each participant. You can learn more about BioSTL Fundamentals by visiting biostl.org. And for your renewed and continuing support, BioSTL, we say thank you.
Hey, this is Steph Nissen. I'm the Director of Digital and part owner at Atomic Revenue here in St. Louis. And entrepreneurially thinking means to me listening to the stories of entrepreneurs that came before you that are in the same space as you, but also finding your own path forward.
Markey, you were talking to us about how the women really helped you see the twin ahas of the bread could be a conduit to achieving
Twin Peaks, Colorado.
Oh my goodness. Just no more bread puns. With this awakening, you saw like you could meet the health goals that you were there through the Peace Corps to advance, help these kids get the nutrition they needed. But then you saw not only are they feeding their kids, they're also selling and creating a revenue source for themselves. So what do you think's really driven? Has it been about providing women with a way of creating a revenue source for their families, nutrition, or is it really about both?
It's about both. And I think that we have struggled a little bit over the last, so the Women's Bakery as it is now is about 3.5 years old. And we've struggled in the last 3.5 years to really figure out which one takes priority or are they on equal footing. And I think truly now this year, we've identified that it is the women, that women's socioeconomic empowerment is the priority. But we couldn't do it without the medium, which is the nutritious bread. And products matter in a business, right? Like you have to have a high quality product that you stand behind. So I think that while these two are very much central to our mission, I think that the method by which we achieve our social mission, which is to socially and economically empower women, is through the sale of nutritious bread.
Awesome. Well, that clarity must also help you to make strategic decisions about how you're going to grow and scale, where you're going to be, how you're going to be there. So today, 3.5 years in, you're well beyond one bakery.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. That almost felt like a softball for talking about our strategic decision this year. I wasn't. I didn't plant that. But yes. So I'll start first with, yes, now we have successfully launched 7 bakeries in East Africa.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's tremendous. And it has been we have a very large team and a very dedicated team, the majority of whom are in Rwanda, just working their tails off to have made this possible.
Where else are you in East Africa besides Rwanda?
We're in Tanzania, and we just launched a pilot franchise bakery in Uganda last month.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very exciting. So that's the backdrop for the strategic thinking and the shift, if you will, because yes, we have learned a lot. And what we did learn, especially with prioritizing women, is that we needed a model shift. So when we first started the Women's Bakery, the model truly was, and unintentionally so, a franchise model where we thought that And when I say we, I mean my co-founder and I, my co-founder, who is also a Peace Corps volunteer, saw that there were tons of nonprofits or NGOs working in Rwanda, all kind of doing the same thing, but none able to collaborate because they're all competing for donor dollars. And we just thought, well, that's silly. We could definitely widen this impact, or at least like create more sustainable impact if we were to collaborate. So we unintentionally created a franchise model in that we would be hired by nonprofits, so therefore we're not a competitor, and sell them the blueprints to a successful bakery that either they or the group of women that they had already been working with would own. Sounded really good in theory, and I honestly think that it could be good in practice, but after you prove that you can build a successful bakery first.
Right.
And so what we learned is that a lot of the nonprofits that we partnered with, and honestly, it wasn't necessarily them, it was us. We were still working out this model. We were still trying to figure out how much it cost to build a bakery, which for context, this may sound high working in a country like Rwanda, but it costs between $100,000 and $200,000 to build a bakery from scratch to profitability. And the horizon there is about 3 years.
That's what I was going to ask. So you're break even, because I'm like, to build because you're doing brick and mortar.
Yeah, we are.
And real estate, from my understanding, in Africa is very expensive.
Oh my gosh. It's not only the real estate, but also when you're working in Rwanda, which is a landlocked country, you have to import all of your construction materials. And then your construction time is delayed. I mean, what would take us to construct something here takes 3 times the time and the amount in East Africa. And just for your listeners, too, for context, and the reason I know this is because I've had the wonderful privilege of speaking to people at Panera, but it costs $1.4 million to build a Panera. Now, obviously, their break even is much faster than ours. But if that paints context, because the other part of our cost is that we do an intensive 3-month training with the women prior to anything. So we're building the bakery while we're training, but like that training takes, it's capital intensive because it's human centric. Right. And so we've got all of these wraparound services for the women to ensure that they have the education that they need and therefore the skills that they'll need to succeed. So in discovering more about this model, we realized that many of the women didn't actually want to own these bakeries. And it wasn't because they're not interested in ownership. What we believe is that they are lacking exposure to the concepts of ownership, meaning that we need to give them a runway of what a healthy, successful, profitable bakery looks like before asking them to assume that risk, right? And so the nonprofits that bought our blueprints really wanted the women to own the bakeries. They didn't want to own the bakeries because the bakeries are capital intensive, which we've learned. And then the women didn't want to own the bakeries because it was a risk that they couldn't fully comprehend. And remember, their collateral is their livelihood, which is their land. So we would actually be doing them a disservice if we asked them to assume that risk. So we pivoted this year to prioritize the social and economic empowerment of women through sustainable, gainful employment by owning all of the bakeries that we build. So we shifted away from a franchise model more toward a Panera model, where all of the bakeries we own will either be company branches or franchises, but franchises are later, like 2 years down the road. We need to have these branches that we have, which we have 3 right now in Rwanda, and bring all of these bakeries to profitability first, and then see which of those models is the most easily replicated elsewhere.
So interesting, because I was in West Africa. This was back in the 90s, specifically in Ghana and Accra, which they are business oriented. They are, I mean, it's just like here in the States. But a lot of the women from there, they were creating businesses and industries, and I don't know if that's traditional amongst women throughout Africa, but a lot of women were leading businesses. And when you talk about, I like the model that you're not making it onerous for young women or young women entrepreneurs to own this until it proves itself profitable. How does that impact, if they're married and they have families? Because the men that are either married to these women or with these women, how does that impact them? Because I know that's a cultural, probably interesting impact.
Yeah, definitely. Because there's still very much the patriarch hierarchy, especially when you're in more rural places, it's a more traditional culture. It's a good question, and it's one I get often, and it's one that I'm usually stumped to answer, and I've been trying to figure out why. I can't figure it out if it's because we're very lucky. I can't figure it out if it's because Rwandan men are more unique and more accepting to females working or owning businesses. But I think it's probably a combination of a lot of things. So first, we currently employ directly probably about 50 women. We've trained 100. And so I think that I know that of the women that we directly employ now, only 1/3 of them or 1/3 live in female-led households. So there are no husbands. So 2/3, 66% do have husbands or men in their lives. So that could be a factor, is that some women, so all of our women do have children, but some, there are no men at home. But for those where there are men at home, we haven't really run into this problem, thankfully. And again, like, I think this is a wonderful testament, perhaps to those men, perhaps to Rwandan culture. I also think that one of the things we're trying to do is provide access to education for everyone, like the people who are engaged with the women at these bakeries. So like, what does employment mean? What is a bakery? And like, what are the benefits of dual income, AKA women's empowerment, right? So the other thing too, and this is something that my team came up with, and I think it's a really wonderful idea, is incentivizing the husbands, because then it creates a stronger foundation. So one of the ways my team has done this is by hiring or contracting the husbands to distribute our bread on bicycles. So we provide a bicycle, and then it's basically commission, that we pay the husband a commission for him to distribute the bread that his wife is making. We're doing that, I think, at one, if not two, of the bakeries in Rwanda. And so far, it's been pretty good. And again, I think it's because you're aligning incentives.
Yes. I was going to say, you're involving now the patriarch of the family, and it no longer becomes more of mom is just providing or the woman is just providing, which is very interesting. So are you taking this model outside of Africa? Are you looking at bringing this model here back to the States?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you asked that. I didn't think I'd have the opportunity to talk about this, but this is a dream. Okay. So yes. And honestly, probably St. Louis, to be transparent, because I think St. Louis would be a really wonderful, place for this. So yes, we do believe at the Women's Bakery that our model can be applicable anywhere. And I think for all of us, the dream is for it to apply to the United States first. Like, obviously, the dream is to expand in East Africa and to become the Panera of East Africa. But I don't think that precludes the opportunity to engage in other markets. And I think the dream would be the United States. So the way that we've been thinking about this right now is that it would be an adaptation of the model. So we would extract the foundations of the model, which is education and like women centricity, but then we would expound upon others, which would be fresh bread in bakeries. And we did pilot this. Actually, we piloted the expansion of our model in the United States. Oh my gosh, it might have been 2 years ago now, and started in Denver and did so successfully. And it's because we got approached, my team member and I, the same week, and not related. I got approached by the International Institute, or someone who is connected to the International Institute in St. Louis. And then a similar agency in Denver approached my team member saying, hey, we've got this group of immigrant and refugee women. We've got this industrial kitchen. We don't know what to do. Do you have any ideas? And we were like, oh my God, yes.
We have a few.
We have so many ideas. Yes. So,
wow.
And at the time when that happened, I was in grad school, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is my dream come true. I really do want to pursue this, but I know I don't have the bandwidth. And because we got approached in Denver at the same time, we pursued Denver. So what we did is we worked with a group of 11 refugee and immigrant women, 10 of whom spoke different languages. Can you imagine? Yes. And our team member who has written all of our curriculum, which is a huge undertaking. And by the way, our curriculum is now nationally accredited in Rwanda. So it's a vocational certificate.
Congrats. That is
in
amazing.
Rwanda. Thanks.
Yeah.
I know. So she adapted the curriculum to tailor it toward an refugee and immigrant population, specifically in the United States. We did a training, and rather than trying to sell fresh bread and compete in that market, which is super competitive and highly saturated, we decided to pursue bread mixes for retail. So like but there's a niche because if you go into the supermarket, like if you go into Schnucks or if you go into Dierberg's, and you're like, cool, I want a not sweet pumpkin bread, or I want a not sweet banana bread, or you know what, I actually love beets, and why don't I put beets in my quick bread? We would be that niche. And so we made sweet potato bread in Denver, and we sold it, and 10,000 Villages picked it up. I don't know if you all are familiar with that company, but they're wonderful. And they specialize in carrying, they're a retail store, and they carry products from artisans across the world. And the goal there is to economically empower primarily women in other countries by selling their goods in the United States.
That's
right?
really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So they picked it up, and they were like, cool, can we have 1,500 products next week?
Wait a minute. 1,500 products or not 1,500 SKUs, right?
Right. Exactly. But still, I was like,
Still, the quantity
That's
alone, even for one SKU, means instantaneous scaling.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, I think it was a really wonderful experience for us, because what it proved is that, yes, there is a market for this model in the United States. Obviously, we would need a whole lot of mentorship, and we would need to craft like a real business plan and probably tweak a lot of things, but it could work.
Oh my gosh. That's like you guys went from 0 to 1,000 really quickly. Okay. Especially here in the States, getting into retail, that's everybody's dream.
Right.
I know. And I think, and the reason I think it would be so powerful in St. Louis is because the Women's Bakery really was born from St. Louis. And so I think there are a lot of people there who still are just so devoted to the Women's Bakery. And I think if we were to see these bread mixes on the shelves of like Dierberg's and Schnucks and Straub's in St. Louis, I do think actually the St. Louis population would be like, well, heck yeah. And knowing that you're actually employing people in your community, right?
And you don't have to build a Dutch oven.
Right.
Are you kidding me?
That's the tagline. No Dutch oven required.
No Dutch oven required. Right.
Excellent.
I could make this.
I didn't say it. You said it. I didn't say it.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
So for a woman who fell into entrepreneurship, do you now self-identify as an entrepreneur?
I think so. I think so now. And I don't know how complimentary this is, actually. I think the reason I would now is truly because I think that I'm able to see opportunity where others see risk. And the reason I say that may not always be complimentary is because often that relegates you as being an ideas person. And I think that while there's a lot of power in ideas, there's also a lot of power in like strategy and manifestation, you know?
Sure. Execution.
Right.
Right. Exactly. So I think yes. And I think the very exciting part about entrepreneurship for me is truly the building of it, like being able to see something that doesn't exist now, and then knowing like, okay, I don't know all of the steps that are required. I don't know everything that this is going to take. There are going to be things that I can't foresee, but I know that like here, this person would be perfect here. This person would be perfect here. This is what we need to get this done, and kind of building that and then watching it sail.
Yep.
That's awesome. And a wonderful note to leave our listeners on as our time together has very quickly come to an end. So I want to thank you again for making time to be with us, and really for inspiring us through your journey as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a social change agent. We really appreciate
Such a great story. I mean,
thank you. I really appreciate it.
I love the way that you're impacting on different continents.
Yes, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be with you all, too. I love this podcast.
Awesome. Subscribe and tell all of your international friends to do so as well.
Okay.
Thanks, Markey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Changing the way you view new ventures, igniting your thinking about entrepreneurship. It's Entrepreneurially Thinking. Get connected and discover more. Visit our website for show notes, resources, information about our guests, upcoming events, and of course, all your favorite episodes. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them for us in the comment sections, and be sure to leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes. The best way to show love is to share. Let everybody know that you're thinking entrepreneurially. So visit our website, entrepreneuriallythinking.com. #ETHINKSTL. Entrepreneurially Thinking is another positive production of Rare Gem Productions. Thanks for listening.